Nice to see everybody as always.
It's been a while. Welcome back.
So recently, it's all over the news about this Griselda person. Anybody research any of that? Anybody knows anything about
You're talking
this?
about Griselda Blanco,
Is there any others?
the godmother,
The Black Widow.
Black Widow.
Didn't she like kill 3 husbands, 4 husbands, all the husbands?
I mean, that's probably where she got the Black Widow nickname from. Yeah.
It became back into the news because of the Netflix special, and she's being portrayed by Sofia Vergara, which is...
It doesn't hurt.
It's
right?
fantastic. I mean, if you're gonna like fantasize the story, right? Why not have Sofia Vergara be it?
Fits the mold. But looking back a little bit at this person, her creation and where she comes from, it's a pretty sad story, considering that during the World War II time, she comes from bad neighborhood, bad country, deprived of probably social structure, and she comes to some kind of power and politics through drug trade.
Yeah, I mean, I believe her story starts out, she is a pickpocket as a preteen, right? She grew up in Colombia, I think in Cartagena.
Cartagena or Medellin, whatever that was. I don't think there's a big difference there in terms of upbringing.
Colombia at that point in time was probably close to a second world country, right? Not very safe. A lot of crime. She's a pickpocket. I think she eventually escalates that real quickly to murder as a 11 or 12 year old.
Which is incredible. Somebody who has that either lack of that ability or care for human life, or basically just the I don't care kind of concept.
Very similar to the movie Scarface. You start on the bottom, come to the to the United States, make it through criminal enterprise, and strike it rich.
It's interesting you mentioned Scarface because I think she believes she named one of the sons.
Godfather.
Godfather.
Yeah, which I believe is why she was end up being called the godmother as well. Right?
Maybe. But the idea is that an 11-year-old who has very little understanding how to use weapons and that she's willing to commit murder actually has some kind of, if you think of just from a mental standpoint, that person has very little regard for human life. If any.
It's probably the effect of the area with which she grew up in. She probably saw a lot of crime and violent crime from a very young age, and if she's out on the street already pickpocketing and stuff, she probably doesn't have a stable home life. And so this is where we see this here. We see it in the inner city in the United States, right? In big cities. You'll turn to violence.
So she starts in Colombia, right?
Colombia, yeah.
And then how does she get to New York?
Well, she first meets... So when she's a preteen, right around the time she's pickpocketing and murdering, she shacks up with a pimp. And I think she's like 13 at this point in time. And they even have like 2 or 3 kids down in Colombia. They eventually split up. She kills him.
Somehow she kills him.
She kills him. And then she meets a cocaine dealer. I think his name is Alberto Bravo. And he moves her. He takes her and they end up in Queens, New York.
And that's when she starts smuggling in terms of she starts creating some kind of fashion empire. And she is able to smuggle by creating better lingeries and stuff like that with small pockets to basically stuff the drugs and merchandise while the person goes through customs.
Is that how she gets to Miami?
Miami comes later because in New York, first off, you raise an interesting point. This is a very intelligent woman. For having probably little to no official schooling, the street smarts and the intuition on this woman is fantastic because she comes up with all these like fabulous ways to smuggle drugs all throughout New York. And I think I read somewhere that she builds up this kind of empire with this guy Bravo in New York, and they end up having something like 1,500 people out there on the streets dealing for them.
And mainly women, because of the attire and everything else. She figured this out, that it's easier to smuggle drugs utilizing a woman versus a man because of the physique and more spaces to hide stuff.
I mean, it's an interesting angle. I'm assuming this is a predominantly male-oriented, business, if you want to say. Profession. And for her to break through, right, and then be able to come up the ranks and become a head of her own organization, I guess, if you want to say. At that time, especially in the 80s, right, 80s, 90s, when she was active, that's a pretty big thing.
So in 75, or around that time, she gets indicted in New York for drug smuggling, and she basically says, I feel the heat is coming. She escapes back to Colombia.
Okay.
Eventually, she spends some time in Colombia. I think at that point, that's when the Pablo Escobar is coming to power through the Colombian cartel, and then somehow she ends up again in Miami with a new husband, and I think he's one of the lieutenants for Pablo.
She kills the guy in New York somehow. After they separate, she kills him, husband too. Then when she eventually ends up in Miami, she ends up there with an assassin who becomes her third husband, and they have Michael Corleone. That's her son, Michael Corleone.
I think it's basically labeling the people who just in drug trafficking: assassin, smuggler, distributor, businessman.
And then in Miami, her empire goes crazy.
Correct.
Right?
I mean, during that time, it's all about those cartel wars and the drug wars and the cocaine wars start. Miami was the drug central because of the access to port. Basically, between Cuba, the access through Mexico, through everywhere else, it's a free-for-all. The Coast Guard could not contain them. It was unmanageable.
That's how she really blows up, right? Miami, right, in the 80s. And that's when she becomes the head of her own kind of, I guess, organization?
It's basically the cocaine capital at that point in time. And it's not just the drugs, it gets violent. And that's really where I think she puts her stamp that sort of differentiates. Look, she was probably violent in New York. She was definitely violent in Colombia. But when she gets to Miami, she gets real violent. And I mean, like, we're talking crazy. No concern for life. Didn't she drive like a van with a crew into like a bank or a mall or something?
Correct. Daylight shooting, straight open.
She didn't care if it was daylight. She didn't care who was around. Just violence, reckless.
It also shows you the support of the enterprise she selected and the trust. People were so feared that she might do something to them. They did not question her authority. We're doing this and that's how she wants it and it's done. There's no second thinking about it.
Well, I think she showed such total disregard for human life that I don't think anybody would dare question her because she would have him killed if she was the one doing the killing right then and there herself. If you already killed your first two husbands, and I don't think these were quiet affairs, I think it was probably well known, and she used that to probably establish some street cred. You open your mouth on the spot, you might get shot. So people just did what she said, and everybody was making money.
Eventually, she actually moves to California. I think it's done through the expansion through the United States, and you can see through the 80s and early 90s, just the drugs take over the whole United States at that point. And then she eventually relocates to California. I think the Miami got so bad at a certain point, the crackdown started happening, and the FBI and DEA started saying, look, we're going to take a different approach. We're just going to put everybody through the federal prosecution system, minimum 10-year sentence. And then that's why she moves a little bit to California to move a little west, which is a little bit less eyeballs, less people here, but yet she can still run her business.
Did she ever face prosecution? Did she ever spend time in jail?
Absolutely. She absolutely did. She got convicted of drug smuggling. She was doing, I believe, a 10-year term. And during that time, they additionally charged her with triple murder. That's the one that did somebody, one of her henchmen or the contract killer, whatever you want to call him, he turned on her. And he basically was saying, look, during one of the raids to kill an assassin that was her associate, they also killed a 2-year-old kid during that process, and she was charged with that murder. The prosecution didn't really finish that. She said, look, she pleaded additional 6 years, and eventually she got released. And after that, that's when she moved back to Colombia.
So she pled guilty to the murder or conspiracy for the murder?
I believe it was conspiracy. That's why she got only 6 years, a lesser charge.
I think she was deported eventually.
Correct. After the finishing of that sentence, plus the 6 years, she eventually got deported.
She was deported.
I'm not sure if the sentence went concurrently or sequentially. My guess it was concurrent. That's why she got a little out earlier. But eventually she got back to Colombia, and then I believe in Colombia she got gunned down by the same method that she created.
Well, it's funny that you say that because yes, she is eventually shot. So I think it was in Miami in the 80s. She developed, novel. She developed the motorcycle drive-by assassination. Right? So you could just be on a street corner and two guys on a motorcycle roll up and pop you right there, and it was like highly effective because these guys could maneuver in and out. It's quick. It's also loud.
That is some invention to have your name attached.
Right? But the funny thing is, the irony is that that's exactly how she ends up getting taken out in Colombia. I think she was also deported because she was probably still like running so much havoc from jail here, and like, probably you need to go.
And I guess that kind of brings the whole question of when they do these documentaries like Netflix about her. Is it glorifying her? Is it glorifying what she was doing? As opposed to, I guess, maybe the other side, which, it's just a story and it has to be told and people should know who she is.
It's definitely a compelling story. And it's really surprising, especially being a female, that this story hasn't been told in more, glamour and glory previously. But to your point, if you're going to cast Sofia Vergara or somebody like that in the main role, then yeah, you're totally glamorizing it, right?
I don't disagree with that. So the estate challenged Netflix. They asked them maybe not to release the video or the footage or the series. And the question is, where is this estate coming from? So apparently when she was in Miami and eventually California, she accumulated a lot of real estate. She lived a very lavish lifestyle. And when she passed away, that estate eventually gobbled up all the holdings. It's actually a lot of money in there, which nobody's ever challenged to ask for reparations or anything like that. So that's very surprising.
She had a lot of kids.
Yes.
All sons too, which is just wild. I don't think she had any daughters, but all sons. A couple of them died before her, and so I imagine some of them were in the family business.
Right, and I think that's the issue like I would have is in the sense of if they're suing Netflix for the rights, aren't they almost benefiting from her criminal actions?
In a sense, I would agree with that statement. Basically, you're saying these bad acts created this person, and this complete disregard for human life made her even more famous, and now somehow in afterlife she's benefiting from her bad acts, which is basically not supposed to happen.
I mean, you could make that argument, right? Because if they had attempted to freeze her holdings or her assets when she was being criminally prosecuted, she wouldn't be allowed to keep that stuff in that situation. So is it still directly a causal link, or is it so far removed because it's not anything she's doing? It's just somebody else completely unrelated to her telling a story about her, which is, it's newsworthy, it's out there. I mean,
I would agree with you. It was not with Sofia Vergara playing her.
I mean, the other thing too is if they would have got somebody else.
Talking about a compliment, a post-mortem compliment is to have Sofia Vergara play you as a,
Look, I don't really care what anyone looks like, and you do you, but this was not an attractive woman. If you see pictures of her, this was not an attractive woman. You understand, look, she grew up a hard life, so you wouldn't expect her to look like Sofia Vergara. But it's just, I find it odd that that's who they chose.
Let's parlay this a little bit to Pablo Escobar's wife. You cannot say she's not an attractive woman. She's a very attractive woman.
Sure.
Yes, she was just as vicious. Yeah. Maybe it's like second generation and stuff like that. But yet, it still exists. Yeah. During World War II, just to say, the women's ability to do abuse and murder was a lot higher than men's in ability to sustain that type of behavior. Yeah. So the fact that she had it in her, I don't think it's that far-reaching. It's there, it exists. If it's cultivated from a young age, it's going to come higher, higher, and higher.
I think the other issue is to kind of think of is, yes, she was not necessarily convicted. I guess the estate will come and say, look, she never was convicted, or she was convicted of lesser crime, she did her time, and she was let out. All these things that coming out right now that she's accused of, technically, she was never convicted of. And therefore, Netflix should not benefit from that. At the same time...
Fiction?
But at the same time, you almost have to say, look, if everybody seems to kind of know who she is, all these things, all these documentaries are coming out, it seems like all these evidence are pointing that she was mastermind behind multiple murders. I find it, I got some issue with the fact that somebody's going to actually benefit from that.
Well, let me ask you this. So Madoff, when they did that documentary, did they ask permission from the Madoff family to do that? Did the Madoff family get any kind of royalty rights?
Yeah.
I actually would, right, and I don't know that. I don't know, right, and I would think that if there were any money to be made as far as royalties, it should be going to the victims, right?
You would think. I mean, there's victims.
But who is the victim who came forward saying, "Look, I'm the victim zero from her enterprise"? Nobody has ever come forward and sued her civilly.
Right.
Madoff, on the other hand, got sued civilly, and there's outstanding debt that was out there in existence. Nobody's come forward saying, "Look, because of her, my son is in drug rehab for all his life," or something like that, or way worse. Still, parlayed into today's society, in today's interesting. The Netflix show gets a lot of views, a ton of views, and people saying it's pretty good. I watched a little bit of it. I have not watched the whole part of it. Yeah. But again, I don't think that show is able to show the full amount of murder and mayhem that she created. But the idea of it that is glorifying somebody who committed a lot of bad acts, maybe is not the best way to get eyeballs to the TV. Maybe.
You're not wrong. They're taking a true story and maybe it's depicted slightly, more romanticized for TV or whatnot, but they could have just made up a story, right? And it would depict the same violence and the same, issues and whatnot, and people are going to benefit from that. And if they don't, on the other hand, if they don't pay the family, right, if the family doesn't sue, somebody's still benefiting from it, right? The people who put this together are still treading on that violence and mayhem and chaos and making money off it.
I guess it's no different than the other show that was semi-related to the story is Narcos, right?
Sure.
On the one hand, you're glorifying the lifestyle, you're glorifying the people. And on the other hand, we're talking about one of the worst morally, people out there, right? And
how many 9/11 movies were there? Right? They're like Nicolas Cage made a 9/11 movie where, I think they actually gave some money from that to survive, families of the deceased. But still, this is what we do.
I think we're depicting history with the eye towards maybe some fiction sliced into to make it a little more presentable for the audience. If you just do history just in plain facts, it becomes very unattractive and then people are not going to watch it. Some people might because they're curious about history. Majority population would not even touch it. Hence you bring in Sofia Vergara to make it work.
This is why. If they do this is like a Dateline, documentary, a third of the amount of people are going to watch it.
So now, from the legal standpoint, this whole NIL deal that they had to pay for the... for the family,
just like college athletes.
Yeah.
It's in essence, NIL is name, image, in likeness. It's her image, it's her likeness, or dislike, whatever that is. It's still the same concept. Still, somebody's paying you for this new concept of NIL and this new development of law that's going to happen. And eventually it's going to show up at Supreme Court, your Supreme Court. They're going to have to make a ruling on this because we know what college answer is. They have to pay the name, image, and likeness to the college athlete. What about the regular people in history? Do those people have to get paid? It's going to be challenged. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't even know. I don't know where any of these kids are. Some of them are bound to be U.S. citizens, right? So, you know, if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you're one of the kids that was born in Colombia, do you have the same standing?
You did a little bit of,
And
wills and trust in the state stuff.
I definitely would not want to be, stuck in the middle of a family fight between all the sons, trying to get in the middle of that.
It's grandsons too now.
This thing settled quick. And my guess was probably like, name your figure.
Right.
We're good. Right? Have whatever you want. You want us to make a second part?
Well, look, Narcos and all this stuff. How many parts is it now? 6, 7?
It's a bunch. I don't know.
Right.
I actually haven't watched any of those, but yeah.
Well, isn't it? It's the same idea as always.
Very
It's
similar.
been always like this.
Yeah.
So long as this story has eyeballs into it, we're gonna keep making it and making it and making it to bring money into the companies such as Netflix or maybe Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or Apple or whatever that is going to pick it up and run with this just to make sure they make money, because I believe our society is built on that, for the better or for the worse.
Well, I guess we'll keep watching Griselda and see what happens.
I'm interested. It's on my list, so I'm gonna watch. Right?
Your list is from here to Timbuktu.
There's so many lists. You can't.
You can't have the list. So it's the same idea. March Madness is starting. So eventually we're going to have some NIL stuff there as well.
I like that. Yeah.
So the idea, we're going to see if there are going to be commercials for her on the on the March Madness channels.
Yeah, she's gonna be dunking a basketball or something. Wearing a Miami Heat jersey right now.
Yeah, no, Hurricanes.
Hurricanes. There you go. Yeah. Well.
More people.
Yeah.
They're
probably some of her best customers in the '80s, right?
They were the customer base.
Michael Irvin probably her number one.
Well, it's always fun, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Yes. Cool. All right, guys.
Nice seeing everybody.
All right.